Hello and welcome to Global News Today, bringing you exclusive interviews with leading experts every weekday here on Al Arabiya News. I'm Tom Burges Watson, and coming up in today's programme, Israel carries out the deadliest strikes on the Gaza Strip since the Israel-Hamas ceasefire took effect in January. More than 400 people have been killed. World powers condemn this renewed bombardment of Gaza, which Israel says was done because Hamas repeatedly refused to release hostages. And President Donald Trump and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin hold talks aimed at forging a pathway towards ending the war in Ukraine. Hello and welcome to the programme. At least 400 people have been killed in Israeli airstrikes on the Gaza Strip, which struck during the early hours of this morning. According to health officials in the Palestinian enclave, more than 600 people were also injured. Well, this was the biggest wave of attacks since the 19th of January ceasefire took effect. And Israel says these extensive strikes across Gaza were the result of the repeated refusal by Hamas of a proposed extension of the ceasefire agreement and the release of hostages. Well, Hamas says that 4 of its senior officials were killed in this wave of attacks, which have sparked a strong global reaction. Saudi Arabia's foreign ministry says it denounces Israel resuming strikes on Gaza, quote, in the strongest terms. Meanwhile, France also condemned the strikes, and the country's foreign minister called for an immediate halt to the violence. Well, the administration of President Donald Trump was consulted on Monday by Israel regarding those deadly strikes in Gaza. The White House says that Hamas chose war by refusing to release hostages. Well, the White House press secretary, Caroline Leavitt, told Fox News that President Trump had made it clear to Hamas that, quote, all hell risked breaking loose.
The Trump administration and the White House were consulted by the Israelis on their attacks in Gaza tonight. And as President Trump has made it clear, Hamas, the Houthis, Iran, all those who seek to terrorize not just Israel, but also the United States of America, will see a price to pay. All hell will break loose.
Well, let's get more now. We can speak to Rosalia Bollen, who is a UNICEF official who joins us from the south of Gaza. Rosalia, thank you very much indeed for taking the time to speak to us. Just tell us, first of all, where you are and what the situation is on the ground around you.
I'm in the UNICEF guest house in Al-Mawasi, Rafah. It's a beachy area in the southern tip of the Gaza Strip. This is the area where lots of people had fled to throughout the war. With the start of the ceasefire, some families have returned to their homes, but others have stayed. So there's still a sizable population right around the guest house in this area.
Just tell us what happened overnight. Huge airstrikes were carried out. Just tell us what you saw and heard.
So at about 2:10 this morning, my colleagues and I were abruptly woken up by the sound of very, very loud explosions, very heavy bombardments, including in the vicinity of our guest house. And that continued for about 15 minutes, just relentless bombs, sometimes with only a few seconds in between them. Whenever a bomb hit, when there was an impact, I could see the sky lighting up. After those first 15 minutes or so, towards 2:30 a.m., the bombing subsided somewhat, and that's where I could start hear people scream outside. I heard people yelling right outside the guest house. I heard ambulances starting to arrive, the sirens of ambulances, and the sound of drones and airplanes flying over. That continues up to right now. There's just this constant rumbling of planes and the buzzing of drones. And throughout the day, I've heard occasionally explosions, more more in the distance. We've seen an important inflow of severely injured people into hospitals. Hospitals are overwhelmed. They're trying to cope with this inflow. Healthcare has been decimated throughout the first 15 months of war. And the hospitals that I've been visiting over the past couple of days or before the bombardments, they've been facing some shortages. For instance, in Al-Aqsa Hospital, where I was just a few days ago, in the neonatal unit, nurses told me they've ran out of antibiotics. So it's in these conditions that they are receiving injured people.
Okay, I mean, it sounds extremely frightening what you've been through, and it sounds like, as you say, hospitals were already struggling before this happened. I mean, just going back to, what happened as the bombardment began. I mean, what went through your mind at 2 o'clock this morning? What were you thinking, and did you feel like you yourself might be in danger?
Yeah, it's been terrifying. It's been really tough, and when you hear those planes approaching, you're just on edge because you know a bomb is going to be dropped. You don't know where it's going to land. You don't know when it will impact. So you're just sort of frozen for a couple of seconds as you wait for the impact, for the bomb to hit. During the war, we've been saying that no place in Gaza is safe, and we're back at that now because we know that bombs have been hitting tents and shelters, including schools turned into shelters. There's dozens and dozens of children who have been killed throughout the Gaza Strip. So unfortunately, yet again, no place in Gaza is safe, and that is an absolutely terrifying thought for me and my colleagues too.
Yeah, I mean, the ceasefire has been in place for almost exactly 2 months now. I'm just wondering, what are people saying to you there? Do people say it's now collapsed or it's about to collapse?
I think fear has been hanging in the air for weeks now. We made a really good start with the humanitarian community during the first 6 weeks of the ceasefire, when we were finally allowed to fully operate, to pick up cargo from the crossing and to distribute life-saving supplies to families in need throughout Gaza. And the aid that we were able to pick up has been reaching children, has been reaching families. Because the needs are very, very high, we haven't had the luxury to pre-position aid in our warehouses and to build up a considerable stock of supplies. We've tried to push out as much aid as we could. We have some supplies left in our warehouses, but we do need the crossings to reopen to avoid those supplies from being depleted. But with the start of this blockade on aid supplies, on fuel, on cooking gas, fear has rapidly spread. As I've been engaging with parents and children throughout Gaza, I've had children asking me what I thought would happen next. There's parents asking me whether the war would resume. Parents have asked my opinion. What is it that I would do in their place? They have fled from Jabalia. They're here in Al-Mawasi. The thing they would love most is to return to their homes in Jabalia. But what if the war resumes? What if airstrikes intensify? Sure. So fear has been omnipresent, and it's heartbreaking that this nightmare scenario is now materializing.
Yeah, and I'm just wondering, Rosalia, when people ask you questions like that, what should we do? Is this the end of the ceasefire, and has the war begun again? I mean, what sort of things are you saying to these people?
Over the past couple of days, I've mostly engaged with children who were asking me those questions. It's extremely difficult. It's very awkward. You want to give an honest answer. The honest answer is that I don't know what is going to happen. I didn't know a couple of days ago that this would happen, although I've been quite fearful. I've told children to listen to their parents and to stay closely with their parents. As of today, UNICEF has been calling for an immediate restoration of the ceasefire, and I can only fondly hope that those calls will be heeded.
Just tell us a little bit about what UNICEF's activities on the ground there in Gaza have been and are today, despite what I'd imagine is a good deal of chaos all around you?
Yeah, our activities haven't halted despite the near impossible conditions. These are really frustrating conditions to work in, and it's frustrating that the gains that we achieved at the beginning of the ceasefire are being so rapidly erased. But UNICEF has all sorts of programming in support of the provision of essential services. So, for instance, mental health activities organized for children, informal education in temporary learning centers, routine immunization, cash assistance programming. The most vulnerable families inside Gaza receive digital cash assistance from UNICEF in an e-wallet, and that assistance continues.
And I just want to pick up on what you were saying a little earlier about the situation faced by medical staff there in Gaza. I mean, we're hearing from the Red Crescent that hospitals are currently completely overwhelmed. I mean, as you said, there's been 15 months of bombardment. 400 people have been killed, more than 400 people have been killed in the last 24 hours, more than that number injured. How can hospitals there in Gaza do anything to help the injured, given that they had such inadequate resources before these events even happened?
They have to improvise. They have to make do with the means that they have. Thankfully, during the ceasefire, we have been able to bring some supplies in, including UNICEF. We have been bringing health supplies in, medical disposables, obstetric kits to help deliver babies, specialized equipment for neonatal units, for instance, warmed lamps, patient monitors for neonatal intensive care units. But so much more is needed. And what is really frustrating is that we have those supplies, including health supplies, ready to be moved in if only we were allowed to bring them in. For instance, UNICEF has 20 ventilators. Those are machines to help preterm babies breathe. The lungs of preterm babies who are born too early, aren't fully developed yet, and they need support to breathe. So those machines are ready right outside of Gaza, but we're unable to get them and to bring them in and to bring them to hospitals.
Just lastly, before we let you go, I mean, life was extremely challenging, as we were saying before this latest bombardment. I'm assuming morale is extremely low, even lower than it probably was yesterday. It was probably low yesterday. How would you describe the overall mood and feeling around you there in Gaza, Rosalia?
It's just heartbreaking to see and to speak with people. Families feel abandoned by the world. They feel abandoned by the international community. They've been through so much. They're worn out physically. They're worn out mentally. And now this resumes at a brutal pace, at a very high scale, with reportedly hundreds and hundreds of people killed. So the hope that families had, and especially that children had, is being shattered, and that is just horrific.
Okay, well, we wish you and your colleagues at UNICEF all the very best, and thank you very much for sparing the time to speak to us. Rosalia Bollen, thanks again.
Thank you for having me.
Well, let's get some more analysis so we can cross to Birmingham in the United Kingdom and speak to Professor Kamel Hawwash, a Palestinian academic and political analyst. Professor Hawwash, great to have you with us once again. Let me just start by asking you, first of all, a very basic question. What's your reaction to what's been happening in the Gaza Strip these last 20 hours or so?
Well, I woke up during the night at around 4 o'clock, and I checked my phone, and I saw the horrendous reports from Gaza of more than 350 people at that time being killed, and the number is escalating. This is horrendous barbarism by Israel. From the Palestinians feeling there's a ceasefire, it just went on and killed over 450 people. It claims it is targeting Hamas. Let them tell us if they have killed 450 Hamas members, or if not, how many civilian children and women they have killed. It's the most appalling thing we can have, when Israel should have been adhering to an agreement it signed, a ceasefire agreement that should have been transitioning from one phase to another, leading to an end to the war and to the rebuilding of Gaza.
Professor, I'm going to put the same question to someone from the Israeli side in just a moment, but I want to get your opinion as well. I mean, why has the ceasefire deal sort of fallen by the wayside? I mean, there was supposed to be a very clear phase one, a very clear phase two. What happened to that transition, and why are we in this limbo phase of this extension or these demands for extensions of phase one? Why not simply phase two?
Because Israel doesn't want to end this war, this aggression on the Palestinians. If we do go through the three phases, there will be an end to the war. Israel would have to withdraw from every inch of Gaza, but Netanyahu doesn't want to, and he's relying on the change of leader in the White House, because this particular ceasefire agreement was negotiated under Biden. Trump seems to have given him the all okay to do whatever he wants. So he has started to the phase of again increasing the war, when in fact hostages were being released in accordance with the agreement, X number for X number of Palestinian hostages. But Netanyahu is not satisfied. He wants to get more and more, and he thinks that by attacking what he calls Hamas targets, that this will put pressure on Hamas to concede more in this renegotiation. What should have happened is that Steve Witkoff, the envoy from Trump, should have said to Israel and Hamas, you stick to the agreement. Hamas has stuck to every aspect of the agreement. It is Netanyahu who has breached this, because what he really wants is to get the hostages out and then complete the demolition of Gaza, leading to the possible expulsion of the Palestinian people, and he will fail.
I'm just wondering what's actually left of Hamas, as far as you can understand, because we've spoken to some analysts who've told us that the threat posed by Hamas has now been almost entirely neutralized. There is no longer a significant threat posed by Hamas. What's your understanding? What's left of them?
It is what I hear in the media, reports like that. But I also hear reports that they've regrouped, that they have more people volunteering to train to be part of their operation, because people have been devastated by the Israeli aggression, and some of them want to be part of the resistance to the Israeli occupation and aggression against them. Nobody can call what the Palestinians have been doing since the 8th of October terrorism. It is sheer resistance to an occupier who has destroyed nearly 80% of Gaza, and I think Netanyahu wants to destroy the remaining 20% and then drive people out, and then say to his friend in the White House and his son-in-law, Kushner, here is the land, you can turn it into a Riviera of the East. It's the most horrendous policy, but we are led by fascist extremists or Israelis who do not want to see peace with the Palestinians, do not want to see a Palestinian entity come into being, but instead they want to ethnically cleanse all the Palestinians to neighboring countries. Now, those countries are not taking them, not because they hate Palestinians, but because they believe that their rightful place is their homeland in every inch of Palestine, whether they live in Haifa or whether they live in Nablus.
So when President Trump says Hamas chose war and brought this upon itself by not releasing the hostages as he demanded, saying that all hell would break loose if they didn't, they were warned. They haven't done that. How do you respond?
I go back to the agreement. What was the point in signing a ceasefire agreement in three phases? It was clear that hostages would be released in the first phase. Then there would be negotiations on the second phase where more hostages would be released. That is what the families of the hostages welcomed, as it happens, the Israeli hostages, and indeed those Palestinians who would also be released. And then we get to the third stage when there would be a complete withdrawal from Gaza, a reconstruction, and the Palestinians could look to living a normal life, or as near a normal life as possible. But we are looking at sadists who run Gaza, who have attacked children in the middle of Ramadan, who have stopped any supplies in terms of milk for babies. Really, there are 40,000 women who are pregnant in Gaza. They need care, they need feeding. But Netanyahu is determined to hit the demography by killing children and women so that he can reduce the number of Palestinians who live on that land into the future. Think of it that way. If 20,000 children have been killed, that means 10,000 families potentially have not occurred. If they had 5 children each, that would be 50,000 additional Palestinians. He wants that not to happen, as does his fascist accomplices in this so-called democratic state.
I mean, we've heard condemnation come from far and wide with regards to these latest aerial attacks on Gaza. It's come from Egypt, it's come from Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the European Union. Beyond words, what do you think we could expect to see from regional powers with regards to what's been happening in the Palestinian territories?
Yes, one would hope that the Arab countries certainly would cut any diplomatic relations with Israel, and I'll explain why. Certainly the agreement that was signed that brought the United Arab Emirates and Israel together, at the time, Israel promised there would be no annexation of the West Bank. But it is annexing the West Bank. And I hope that our brothers and sisters in the United Arab Emirates will rethink this relationship, because it isn't what they signed for. Did they sign really for a complete annihilation of the Palestinian people, which is what Israel is doing now? And I don't want to pick the United Arab Emirates on its own, because they mean well. But it is the same with all the other Arab countries and the Muslim countries. They shouldn't be a representative of Israel in any Arab or Muslim nation, not because they hate Jews, but because they disagree completely and abhor what Israel is doing. You can't talk to people who are killing children, as they are now, slaughtering children, and who have made it very clear they want Palestinians to be ethnically cleansed. No one, including the British government, I don't just talk about the Arab governments. How is it that the human rights lawyer Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister in the UK, who once said Israel had the right to cut off water and electricity, well, they've done it again, but he has done nothing. And he should suspend any aid in terms of military aid or arms sales to Israel, and he should not be supplying any intelligence to Israel, which it is using to kill Palestinians.
Just lastly, I mean, we were hearing from a UNICEF spokesperson before we crossed to you. She said nowhere is safe in Gaza, and yet we understand Israel has issued some evacuation orders in Gaza. Not sure where people are supposed to go. What's your understanding from talking to people on the ground of exactly what the reality of the situation on the ground in Gaza actually is?
They realize that nowhere in Gaza is safe. A lot of them returned, for example, to northern Gaza. We saw those amazing pictures of this attachment to the land, of people going back to the north and building or assembling tents and so on near their homes or on their land, because they are that connected to the land, unlike the Israeli settlers who have vacated the settlements but won't go back. The Palestinians are attached to this land, and they will not stop being attached to this land. And remember that as part of the ceasefire agreement, 60,000 mobile home units should have been entered into Gaza. But Israel doesn't want that, because it wants to move the Palestinians south and then push them as hard as possible to leave what they would call voluntarily, when in fact they've given them no choice if they are to survive with their families.
Okay, well, thank you very much, as ever, for your time. Professor Kamel Hawwash, always a pleasure speaking to you.
Thank you.
Well, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's office says that these deadly airstrikes are the result of a lack of cooperation from Hamas. While speaking at a press conference in Jerusalem today, An Israeli Ministry of Foreign Affairs spokesperson said that Hamas should have accepted all of Israel's proposals that were brought to the table by the United States. Well, Israel is demanding that Hamas release all the hostages.
Hamas rejected two concrete mediation proposals presented by the U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff. Israel agreed to these mediation proposals. Hamas refused them.
So what do Israeli citizens make of these developments? Well, let's take a listen to what people on the streets of Jerusalem had to say.
Israel army give them to the Palestinian few weeks to release all the hostages. So they took like 20 days, almost 20 days, and nothing moving.
My feeling was not good. I don't like war, like every normal people. It was enough for me and for all citizens from Sderot once on the 7th of October.
I think this is just another phase of trying to put pressure. Thankfully, this time with the support of the United States, it appears.
Well, let's get more analysis. We can speak now to Yaakov Amidror, retired Israeli Major General and former National Security Advisor to Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who joins us now from Tel Aviv. Great to have you with us again here on Al Arabiya News. The Israeli Prime Minister instructed his army to take, quote, strong action against Hamas. What is Israel seeking to achieve at this particular moment?
We are negotiating with the Hamas in the last few months. They were not ready to release any hostages. And at the same time, they are enhancing their military capability, preparing for the war. And it is unacceptable situation in which they are preparing for the new war. And we are doing nothing because we are negotiating the release of the hostages. So we decided that it will be clear for Hamas that there is a price. If they don't release the hostages, Israel is ready to resume the war, and the price is will be clear for them, and then maybe they will be ready to negotiate. Up till now, they said no to every offer of the Americans and the mediators. So it is a situation that cannot be continued.
But what's happened, therefore, to the ceasefire deal that was agreed on the 19th of January, signed on the 19th of January? I mean, there was a time frame stipulated in that ceasefire agreement. Why isn't it being adhered to?
The time was finished. It's the end of stage one, and the Americans put on the table twice offer to extend the ceasefire with the release of some hostages parallel to that. Hamas didn't agree, and this is the result, that Hamas is negative about extending the ceasefire. And if they are not ready to extend the ceasefire, it's the end of the ceasefire.
But lots of countries, like Egypt, for example, are saying this is a blatant violation of the ceasefire. So it still isn't clear. I mean, who's broken the ceasefire agreement?
The ceasefire agreement was finished. The agreement was up till a point in which we got our hostages, the hostages that, according to the agreement, supposed to be transferred to Israel. That was ended, and we wanted to extend the ceasefire for getting more hostages. They were not ready to release the hostages, and through the time that we are negotiating, they use it to enhance their military capabilities. And we understood that it is an absurd situation in which we are negotiating, and they are continuing to build their military capabilities. So we decided that they cannot hold the stick in both sides. Either it is a war or it is release of hostages. Not release of hostages and a ceasefire. This is a situation that cannot be continued.
But didn't Israel agree to a phased deal, and therefore phase one was supposed to lead to phase two? Phase one wasn't supposed to be extended, so why didn't you go into phase two?
because we didn't agree about the terms of the phase two. They had some dreams what the phase two will be. That was not agreed, and if there's no agreement about phase two, it's the end of phase one, and it's the end of the ceasefire. We were ready to extend the ceasefire, but for that we wanted to release some of the hostages so that we will have more time to negotiate. They didn't want to agree to that, and this is the result. Yes, we had an agreement about stage two, but stage two was not determined what are the terms, and we had to negotiate it. In the negotiations, we didn't succeed to come to a common ground. So there are two options: either to resume the war or to extend the ceasefire. They wanted to extend the ceasefire without releasing hostages. That cannot be accepted.
Okay, so 400 people have been killed, we understand, in the Gaza Strip in the last 20 hours or so, 600 or so injured. I mean, we were just speaking to someone from UNICEF there, I mean, describing, horrific humanitarian situation right across the Gaza Strip. It was horrific before yesterday, it's now even worse. And with regards to getting back the hostages, we understand there are, 58, 59, it's not quite clear how many hostages are still being held. It's believed more than 20, however, are still alive. There's huge domestic pressure in Israel for them to be returned alive and get home safely. But with these kinds of attack overnight, aren't they in greater danger?
Maybe they're in greater danger, despite the fact that we are doing everything not to attack in the areas in which the Hamas is holding the hostages. But you have to ask yourself all the time, what is the alternative? If the alternative is not getting anyone, and at the same time to have a ceasefire in which Hamas is becoming stronger, it's a stupid situation that cannot be accepted.
I mean, clearly restarting the war wouldn't be good news for the hostages, would it?
Depends what will be the reaction of Hamas. If Hamas understands that that we are going to eliminate it, it might compromise. I don't know. Up till now, with the ceasefire, it didn't work. That is clear.
So, I mean, typically in the past, when these sorts of operations have been carried out, there's been some form of retaliation. I mean, do you think Israel is expecting retaliation, and what form might it take? I mean, could it come from someone apart from Hamas? Or could it come from, for example, the Houthis in Yemen? What sort of scenarios do you envisage?
I think that the situation is totally different. In the past, we asked ourselves what would be the retaliation from Gaza. But the capabilities of Hamas today in Gaza are such that they are not relevant as a threat to Israel inside Israel. They are very relevant to anyone who want to come into and to live in the Gaza Strip and to walk in the Gaza Strip and to act in the Gaza Strip. But they are not relevant as a threat to Israel. They lost their ability to launch missiles, big number of missiles to Israel, or to make a ground raid like they did in the 7th of October, that they don't have in their capacity after the long war that we did in Gaza. In the past, we asked ourselves, okay, what will be the reaction from Lebanon? What Hezbollah will do? Hezbollah got a huge blow and now is fighting for his survival, not about how to retaliate into Israel. And the Houthis are now confronting the Americans, or the Americans confronting the Houthis, and I don't see the Houthis have the capabilities today and tomorrow when they are confronting the Americans to launch missiles into Israel. So the situation now is different than the one in which we had been a year and a half ago. Now Hamas is almost irrelevant as a threat to Israel. Islamic Jihad is not relevant. Hezbollah is fighting for its survival, not to attack Israel. Iran is very careful after the exchange of fire between Israel and Iran. The Iranians understand their vulnerability. And the Houthis are very much occupied by the tension to the American attack now. So for the strategic situation of Israel is much, much better.
Okay, I mean, there'll be people watching who'll be wondering if you say that the threat posed by Hamas is irrelevant and there isn't a threat. They'll have difficulty understanding the rationale behind last night's attack that killed, 400 people, many of them women and children, and injuring 600 others when they got very limited access to medical care, as everyone knows. But just to wrap up, I mean, if mediators...
A minute. What you said? We attacked and we killed terrorists. If the terrorists live with civilians, some of the civilians will be killed. But
in a densely populated area like Gaza, I mean...
A minute, let me answer. All our targets are targets which had been based on very good intelligence as terrorist targets. If the terrorists are living with civilians, no question that the civilians will suffer, but that you have to ask and to blame the terrorists, why they are fighting for within civilian people.
Well, I mean, there are 2 million people, as we all know, living in a very, very small area, one of the most densely populated areas in the world. So impossible to carry out large-scale attacks without killing civilians. Just to wrap up, though, I mean, if mediators have struggled as much as they seem to have done to secure a ceasefire deal, a truce, I mean, when we want to start talking about a longer-term solution from Gaza, if they can't even get a truce organized that's actually going to work, I mean, long-term peace, I mean, that's a very long way off, isn't it?
No, we don't intend to have a peace with Hamas. Hamas should be eliminated. As a terror organization, after what they did in the 7th of October, we are not looking for any peace agreement with Hamas. Hamas is not a partner for peace, not a peace agreement and not peace negotiations. It's about releasing the hostages and to rebuild Gaza without Hamas. Hamas is not a partner for a peace.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for your time, Yaakov.
You are most welcome.
Retired Israeli Major General. Thank you very much indeed. Now, the US President Donald Trump and his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin have spoken by telephone. This as pressure mounts on Russia to accept a ceasefire deal to end the war in Ukraine. Well, speaking to reporters aboard Air Force One at the weekend, President Trump made the first mention that he'll be speaking with President Putin, stating that land and power plants would be part of the conversation. He described it as, quote, dividing up certain assets between Russia and Ukraine.
We'll, be talking about land. It's a lot of land. It's a lot different than it was before the war, as you know. And we'll be talking about land. We'll be talking about power plants. Because that's up, that's a big question. But I think we have a lot of it already discussed very much by both sides.
You'll ask him.
Ukraine and Russia.
You'll ask him.
We're already talking about that, dividing up certain assets. Yeah, and they've been working on that.
President Trump speaking there aboard Air Force One. Well, let's get more now, and we can speak to Carla Sands, former US ambassador to Denmark, Greenland and the Faroe Islands under President Trump. Thank you very much indeed for joining us once again here on Al Arabiya, Ambassador Sands. Great to have you with us. What can a telephone call achieve? Can it create the necessary pathway to ending that war in Ukraine, do you think?
Well, I think it's certainly the first great step, right, Tom? There were no telephone calls in the prior administration. I don't think Joe Biden spoke with Vladimir Putin the entire time that the war went on. And that's a tragedy because people are dying. President Trump wants to end the war and stop the killing. I think the globe can be really pleased about this first step. And certainly talking is the first step.
Again, in terms of concessions extracted from the Russian side, I mean, what realistically can we expect President Trump to obtain? Because he's got to obtain something, hasn't he?
He does. So I don't think either side is going to go away entirely happy. I think that both are going to give up some of the things on their wish list. I'm sure both have a few non-negotiables. But the fact that they're talking in this granular way so quickly is really encouraging. I think they both want to be done with the war. Well, I know Zelensky has personally and some of his inner circle profited from this war. I think he said he's misplaced around $100 billion that he says it's mysterious. He doesn't have it. He can't account for it, of the money that the U.S. government, U.S. citizens, because it's tax dollars, sent to him. So that's discouraging, and hopefully we can get some of that back to help with the DOGE effort of reducing corruption in the United States and helping our country. But I'm encouraged that Zelensky and Putin are now both in discussion with the U.S. government. And I'm thrilled that they were able to make progress even in Saudi Arabia not long ago. So this is a wonderful, hopeful first step. And now we just have to see, how do they complete this process?
Yeah, because it's not without political risks for President Trump, is it? I mean, this is risky business, because supposing, that call and future efforts yield zero results, I mean, that's not a great outcome for President Trump, is it?
Well, I think having the dialogue is the first great step. So that is in itself an achievement, since it hasn't happened in 3.5 years. So let's just reflect on that positive step. And there may be 2 steps forward, 1 step back. I don't know. Zelensky already retreated 3 times on signing a minerals deal with the U.S. And now I think he came out a few days ago and said, oh, by the way, I want X. He wanted some other guarantees. So I don't know if he's a reliable partner. I hope that he is, and that we can get the deal done between Putin and Zelensky. But it's been Zelensky that's been, in fact, I think President Trump even said, look, the hardest actor in this bringing this together to a head has actually been the Ukraine piece. So, and that was disappointing to hear. But I think there's no way that this war actually ends in a victory for Ukraine. They don't have a pathway to win the war. And I think both countries are war weary, and it's time to put an end to this. It should never have begun, and wouldn't have if President Trump had been in the White House.
Well, let's see if he can stop it. But it did happen, and Ukraine obviously didn't invade itself. And, the Ukrainian president represents a country that has lost tens of thousands of soldiers on the battlefield defending its territory, which is probably what any country would have done. Ahead of that call, we heard President Putin hitting out at the Western sanctions on Russia. Only a matter of half an hour or so before the call was due to begin, President Putin was berating those sanctions. I mean, that suggests they're working, they're having the desired effect. And that presumably gives President Trump quite a strong lever, doesn't it?
It does. I think it's going to be a combination of carrots and sticks on both sides. That's my suspicion. I only speak in my personal capacity, but regarding the war itself and the fact that it happened, let's not forget that Vladimir Putin told the West over and over, more than 10 years ago, he began to say, do not presume that you're going to enter Ukraine into NATO. Stop it. It's a red line. And so there were talks going on from both sides of the aisle in the U.S. with Ukraine, and to move them forward. And that was a red line for Vladimir Putin. He said it was, and then he followed through. So perhaps we should also pay attention to what world leaders say when they give us warnings that are red lines for them. And that's maybe time to have that discussion, and not after hundreds of thousands of the treasure of both countries have been killed.
Yeah, I'd like to ask you in just a moment about, whether you think NATO will one day include Ukraine. But before that, I just want to pick up on something you were mentioning there about carrots and sticks, because that's exactly the language used by Bradley Bowman, who is a senior director of the Center on Military and Political Power at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. He said this: the US has been consistently offering in some form preemptive concessions, he's talking about President Trump here, that have been weakening the American and Ukrainian negotiating position. I think, he says, there's a real danger here that the administration's approach is boiling down to sticks for Ukraine and carrots for Putin. So using your carrots and sticks analogy, what do you have to say to that line of argument?
Well, I'm not in the room where they're having that call, but I'm sure there are carrots and sticks, and it's going to be on both sides. I think that people are are really, perhaps remembering the ginned up Russia hoax of almost 8 years ago, that was ginned up by the Hillary Clinton campaign, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, and their intelligence team in the Oval Office, and that targeted President Trump when he was a private citizen and then while he was president in his first term. So, let's put that aside. Let's hope and pray that President Trump and the two sides do come to a good deal, that the killing stops. That's the number one thing. And understanding that neither side is going to get everything that they want. And that's how it is in a negotiated settlement.
Okay, going back to my earlier question, so negotiations obviously underway, both sides setting out their red lines. I mean, President Trump made it sound long before today's phone call that NATO membership for Ukraine was really unlikely to happen. I mean, do you think it could happen perhaps eventually at a later stage? What are your thoughts?
Well, I don't think in my lifetime that Ukraine will be part of NATO, but 100 years from now, I have no idea. But certainly not in the near future.
Okay, I mean, one of the priorities from the Trump administration, I mean, really, since before President Trump even took office for the second time, right along the campaign trail, ending the conflict quickly was this top priority. But, I mean, surely it's about the terms and conditions for ending it, not just ending it for the sake of ending it, but ending it in a way that it's actually going to stay ended. It's going to have a lasting conclusion. And that's something that the Europeans obviously want to see happen. And they've given as much to this war effort financially as the Americans have. I mean, they've got a point.
I don't believe that's correct. We've given a lot more than $100 million more than the Europeans.
The Europeans have given about 52%. America's given about 48%, according to the sources I've seen. So it's a little bit more.
The European money is a loan. The U.S. money has been given, and we are also supporting the Ukrainian pensions, paying the government salaries, paying for junkets, for fashion shows. The spending. The U.S. is not just funding the war. We are funding Ukraine's lifestyle, and it has to stop.
Well, it is a country at war, and as I said, they didn't ask to be invaded by Russia. When it comes to divvying up the assets, as President Trump put it on Air Force One, I mean, Ukraine's presumably part of that conversation as well, isn't it, given it's their sovereignty, their assets?
Yeah, yes, of course. But let's not forget that this war didn't have to happen, that there was a negotiated settlement in early 2022. And Joe Biden and Boris Johnson basically put the kibosh on that settlement. And that was agreed on between Zelensky and Putin. So, this war did not have to happen. It wasn't just we had a weak president in the White House, but there was a negotiated settlement. The war powers in the world wanted this war, unfortunately. And so this is a tragedy. It's a tragedy on both sides that people have died. I'm just glad that it's coming to a conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, today happens to be the 11th anniversary of the annexation of Crimea, the Crimean Peninsula by Russia. I mean, this goes back a lot longer than just a couple of years ago when this particular war started. I mean, surely the annexation of Crimea by Russia wasn't also Ukraine's fault, and it wasn't President Biden's fault because he wasn't president at the time.
That's right. It was another weak U.S. President Barack Obama, when Vladimir Putin invaded the Crimea. And then he built a giant bridge, and then he drove a truck over it just to show ownership. Yes, he did annex Crimea.
I mean, it does feel like President Zelensky is getting a lot of the blame from the Trump administration. I mean, and for unnecessarily, they say, prolonging the war. I mean, he's simply defending his country, isn't he? I mean, you have to hand it to him.
Yeah, I really don't want to get into my personal thoughts about Zelensky as a leader. I'm sorry. I mean, what he did in the White House, in the Oval Office, about 2 weeks ago, was so appalling. His behavior. I'll just share with you. If I was receiving money from, say, my banker, at my bank and I go in to have a loan, to get a loan from my banker, and my banker says, you know, XYZ to me, I would be like, okay, thank you very much. Okay, can I have the loan? Yes, you can. Okay, thank you. And I would shake my banker's hand and I'd be appreciative, and I wouldn't be arguing. I wouldn't be interrupting. I wouldn't be saying, oh, well, I want you to throw in this and that along with my loan. That, you know, the show, the display that Zelensky put on in the Oval Office, in my opinion, was really appalling.
One voice we've heard from here at Al Arabiya in the last 24 hours has been that of John Bolton, former National Security Advisor. I don't know what you think of him, but he was asked by my colleague, can President Putin manipulate President Trump? And his reply was, I think that's very likely to happen. What are your thoughts?
Well, I don't want to speak ill of John Bolton. We worked together when he was the NSA in the Trump White House. We worked on important issues for American security. And I think that's about all I can say about John Bolton.
Okay, fair enough. What happens if no deal can be reached? Where does that leave the Trump administration? What are its next steps?
Well, I think the next steps will be largely up to Zelensky and Putin, because I don't believe the U.S. taxpayers are willing to continue to fund this war. And so perhaps Europe will step in. I don't know that. They've been talking, but don't seem to have a credible plan that they've been able to put together. They seem to want to do something, but not able to come to a consensus. And it's very hard for them to operate without U.S. Military involvement, because their capabilities simply have not developed in the years since Barack Obama in 2014 said we need you to put 2% toward your defense, and we need you to have a credible, capable defense, well funded with trained military fighters, and they still have a way to go, unfortunately, to meet the NATO requirements. They all get a report card. Every country gets a report card from NATO that's in the alliance, and many of them are failing. They're just not delivering what is needed to be delivered.
Just lastly, I'm being told we're nearly out of time, but I just wanted to ask you this. I mean, President Trump spoke quite often about President Putin on the campaign trail, spoke of his relationship with President Putin. I mean, how would you characterize that relationship, Ambassador?
Well, I would like to think that President Trump can pick up the phone and call any world leader. I think that's the goal. I think that, in fact, should be the goal for every world leader, that we have a dialogue with the peers so that if there is something happening, there's communication. It's the first step toward resolving a dispute. And I think that with communication, you can attempt to have a diplomatic resolution rather than having kinetic war, which is something that I think most of us just don't want to see in our countries. Most people watching your show want peace in their country, and they want prosperity, and they want to be able to pass on a good life to their kids. And war interrupts all of that. And it's terrible. It's a terrible thing. President Trump is not part of that military-industrial complex. He wants to spend money to have a credible defense. He wants to exercise and be ready for conflict to prevent conflict. You have to prepare for war to prevent war. Weak nations are vulnerable and invite conflict, invite war. So we have to be strong. And President Trump is strong, and he will have a good relationship, a working relationship with every world leader at some point during his presidency. I truly believe that.
All right, we're going to have to leave it there. We really appreciate you taking time out of your very busy schedule to speak to us, former U.S.
It's a pleasure, Tom. Thanks.
Carla Sands, thanks again for your time. Well, that is all we have time for on Global News today. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Be sure to join us again tomorrow for more exclusive interviews. Until then, bye-bye.